Hello and welcome to our 10th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Edwin in Boston, joined by Johansson in Charlotte. Hey Johansson, happy double digits. We made it to 10. So what's on deck for today?
Hey Edwin, happy Friday. So there's so many awesome activities happening with Azure and financial services organizations these days. I'm so excited to have our guests share very common scenarios that they've been working on with many of our customers. First, we'll briefly discuss how Azure CSAs or Cloud Solution Architects play a huge role in building solutions of each unique scenarios. We'll move to discussions about how combinations of Windows Virtual Desktop and Zero Trust have been an enabler for fintech banks. Then we'll talk about how customers' risk modeling infrastructure went through a huge transformation. When turnaround time for analysis used to take weeks, now is reduced to mere hours, whiteboarding and demo included. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some Q&A today on FSI Fridays.
Well, you said it, Johansson. Looking forward to having some fun with this one. For those of you watching live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend 30 minutes or so talking on today's topic. We'll leave the last 10 to 15 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's go ahead and get started with meeting the presenters for today. We are joined by three stellar individuals from our customer success organization. So, Carla, we'll start with you. As a director of customer success, you're tasked with helping your team be the best versions of themselves, especially in Microsoft's Learn It All culture. I hear you're taking the help everyone learn it all approach at home as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Edwin. So it's funny, with the quarantine, a lot of people are having their kids work or learn from home. I've been learning from home, or having my kids learn from home their entire career, or maybe not career, but their entire school career. We've been homeschooling for 13 years, and so when everyone else is freaking out about, oh my gosh, how do I do this learning at home, I'm providing a lot more advice to people on how they can actually do it a little bit better.
Well, that's pretty awesome, Carla. I think I'm going to call you right after this session and get some advice from you because I'd love some help. But getting back to business, so, CSAs and, the customer success, it's all about why can you tell us more why customers are finding our customer success organization valuable? And how did the upcoming, CSA guest speakers like Shiva and David, how are they enabling success?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a quick intro, I lead a team of architects who specialize in helping our financial services customers be successful in their adoption of Azure. So they provide best guidance and best practices. They perform architectural design sessions, which will enable the customer to envision how they can put together the services into a cohesive solution. And when they accelerate the workload into production, it brings about the business value that much more quickly. Often our customers are asking us, so what are other customers doing on Azure? Sharing how Azure is being used helps with the art of the possible thinking. So we thought we'd share with you today two of these scenarios where we're seeing leveraged pretty heavily in today's world. Obviously, with COVID-19, it forced a lot of organizations to rethink how their working profiles actually work. So David is going to take us through a Windows Virtual Desktop scenario, which supports organizations enabling their workforce to remain productive and secure while working from home. And then Shiva is going to talk through how customers are using the Azure platform to perform risk modeling to inform their business processes, allow them to better predict pricing, underwriting, and payouts. And as he demonstrates, it's not always about rewriting everything new for the cloud. He found a pretty ingenious way to run Fortran on Azure.
Thanks for that info, Carla. Well, let's jump right in. I can't wait to start. So, David, let's start with you. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, as a CSA, I'm sure you've seen it all and have architected many creative solutions. I know you're, just on a more personal note, I think you're part of a band. You've got a single coming out. Want to hear a little bit about that, but also I want you to kind of talk about that creativity. I hear you're a rock star, and I want to just, understand from a technical perspective.
Yeah, hey, well, thank you. Yes, I technically have not given up the dream, even though I find myself planted well into my 40s, and the opportunity to do a shameless plug. Yes, my band, It's been 4 years in the making, but we now have a single that's officially dropped today. The band, Grand Electric, we're a New York-based. We've been called a stoner rock band. Again, at our age, not sure stoner rock is the right term. Kind of more aging rocker now. The single's called "Bad for You," and it's available on all streaming platforms as of right now.
That's great, David. Glad to plug you in, and we'll be sure to see you on Spotify. So back to business. Over the last 6 months, so many customers have pivoted and accelerated their virtual desktop infrastructure quicker than ever. What was the key driver that fit best with this Windows virtual desktop scenario?
Yeah, so remote desktop technologies have been around for, you've got a couple of decades, whether it's Microsoft's remote desktop services, partner technologies like Citrix, VMware Horizons, etc. But these tend to typically be deployed kind of in an organization's data center and connected to via consistent and sometimes local connections. With the COVID pandemic kind of hitting, it's forced organizations to really rethink how to make users productive. All of a sudden I can no longer go into the office and sit down at my desk and turn on my computer and start working kind of locally. So what we've found is Microsoft customers have really needed to find a way to ensure that users within their organization are productive when working in a very inconsistent environment. So you think, for example, I need something that can flex based upon how my users are connecting, and how am I going to sit there and provide those solutions? So do I need to give them a full kind of rich, kind of immersive kind of desktop experience that they're used to when they're sitting at their desk? Do I just need to provide them access to applications and data that's sitting on premise, and I don't really mind where they potentially kind of consume that from? I just need to give them an access in, or am I going through this digital transformation as a whole and need to find some way to really look to the cloud to provide a kind of a more permanent and full-time solution for serving up virtual and remote kind of desktop and productivity solutions. But on the flip side, I also need to make sure that it's very easy and simple for my end users to actually consume. So again, with the pandemic, with the urgency, is I don't necessarily have the time and resources to completely retrain my entire workforce. So I need something that is relatively intuitive for my end users to be able to kind of, okay, I just need to jump onto a device, log in, and have my get access to my email, to access to Teams, etc. We were very fortunate with kind of Windows Virtual Desktop kind of hitting the market. Roughly, again, I hate to use the term, it's fortunate when there's a pandemic going on, but it's kind of, it's fortunate that Windows Virtual Desktop kind of became one of these generally available services around 6 months prior to a lot of the pandemic changes coming on. What makes it kind of unique is it allows you to really utilize the Microsoft services and licensing that you have, bring some of the best practices you have from on-premise around kind of user and image and desktop management, and kind of plug them in and let Microsoft really kind of doing 70 to 80% of the work for you. All I'm really doing is, rather than deploying my virtual desktop image to a server I have in a data center, I'm deploying it out into Azure, and then letting the Windows Virtual Desktop service kind of handle everything else. And so as an end user, I just need to open up an app, log into a browser, and hit the service, and I'm running as if I was running back at my desk.
That's amazing, David. Our customers, as part of the pandemic, really had to shift from working in an office to now working remotely at home. So for the IT organizations that haven't leveraged Windows Virtual Desktop yet, how much effort is required to actually deploy a solution like this, and how quickly could they do that?
So again, because a lot of it is designed to be similar to how Microsoft runs kind of the Office 365 suite. It's a kind of a software as a service base. So the service is there from kind of a licensing standpoint. If you're licensed for the kind of the Microsoft 365 suite, so for Windows 10 Enterprise and Office 365 E3 and above, you have all of the kind of the financial investment there to stand the service up. All you really need to do is to decide, okay, what kind of image or what kind of operating system I want to run? Is it do I have legacy Windows 7? Do I want to look at modernizing with Windows 10, Windows 10 multi-session, or doing traditional kind of server-based session hosting with Windows Server kind of 2016 and above? Once you decide that, I just need an Azure subscription with a virtual network. I can take these machines, I can plug them in and deploy them, connect them up to the WVD service, and I'm off and running. Usually, we stand these things up in under a couple of hours.
Well, that's good. I think time to deploy, time to value is always top of mind for customers. But speaking of top of mind, what about security, right? Customers are used to having people go to work, maybe connected directly to the network. But how do you take a desktop, throw it in the cloud, and expect it to be secure? And what capabilities do we have to enable mission critical data with security as a top priority?
Yeah, and you really can't. And so whether this is part of kind of an organization's ongoing kind of digital transformation strategy, or kind of enforced upon them by the pandemic and the new normal for working, a lot of organizations are seeing a kind of adopting that zero trust approach. So think about what zero trust really means. Is kind of, instead of assuming that everything that's sitting behind your corporate firewall is safe, the zero trust model just kind of assumes breach. So we're assuming that there are bad actors out there, whether they're trying to get in or they're already in. And so what we do is we need to verify that each request that coming through comes through as if it's originating from kind of an open network. So really, so think about, regardless of where that request kind of originates or what access is trying to do, zero trust really teaches organizations, never trust, always verify. So every request that comes in needs to be fully authenticated and authorized and encrypted before granting access. We can do that through microsegmentation and the concept of least privileged access principles, and they're really applied again to every movement that I would do if I was coming into an organization, and that could be achieved through some of the rich intelligence analytics that Microsoft has been doing for years with our cloud services. So when we kind of break that down, you think what a lot of customers are doing is they're looking at this. Okay, well, how do our consumers or our end users need to access a lot of the resources that we have? So with the pandemic, right? Everybody has their pandemic or their COVID bubble. I don't know what that COVID bubble is. It may be that I live in Austin, Texas, but my wife and I have been potentially, because we have a very young daughter. Maybe we should go up to Michigan, where my in-laws live, and spend kind of the COVID there. So that means, from an organization standpoint, is normally I'm working in an office in Austin, but now all of a sudden I'm in a very different geographical region, and coming in not from the device I'm normally coming in from. So my employees are coming from potentially from devices and locations that they don't normally come from, which means that in the era of kind of, again, working from home, if I have a desktop at the office, I may only have an iPad or a MacBook, or I'm going to my in-laws, a very, very aging, sitting under my father-in-law's desk. That's to my organization, that's untrusted. That's an unknown device. So how do I potentially manage getting David up and running as quickly as possible without having to go and ship him and buy him a device, put the corporate image on there, and then go ahead and ship that out to him, and potentially taking a week to 2 weeks to get that device in his hands. We're not just talking about getting access to cloud services. So yes, in the ideal world is I've got my Outlook and Teams and connected to Office 365. All I need to do is get a desktop and get internet access. It's not always the case. I may need to go and get to legacy or data that's running on-premise, running my data center. So how do I ensure that I can get to my virtual desktop, I can get to my email, but how do I get to those other applications? How do I get to that sensitive, potentially kind of PII-esque information? And to handle that is, how do I handle the additional load? How do I handle kind of potentially, say, splitting traffic between getting to on-premise and getting to the internet, so I'm not adding additional load and attack vectors onto my organization. So with Microsoft,
sorry to interrupt, David. I wanted to just touch on a little topic here, right? I think one of the things that's perceived as zero trust impacts user productivity, and users have to learn new ways of signing in, perhaps MFA. Administrators have to configure numerous policies. what are the different things that Microsoft is doing to implement kind of zero trust or help implement zero trust? And even more importantly, how do we do this while minimizing user productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, Microsoft has been doing this for years, since kind of the inception of things like Hotmail. We've been kind of ensuring that we have the controls and the data in place to ensure that people are safe, that the information is protected. So think about it with Microsoft 365 is we have a number of kind of ways of access and authorization controls, enforcing multi-factor authentication, defining conditional access. Conditional access can be kind of boiled down to, it's really just a bunch of yes and no questions that happen throughout kind of my authentication flow. For example, is my username and password correct? If it's a yes, I move on. Do I need to have, am I coming in from a known location or a known device? Yes or no. If I'm not, force multi-factor authentication. And then with role-based access controls, because kind of assigning the right permissions at the right time is we're ensuring that minimal, the minimal level of access to the resource that they need to get access to. When you start to run infrastructure and applications within the Azure ecosystem, if you can just jump back again real quick to the previous slide. There we go. So think about it, we're having that. So whenever you start to deploy applications and infrastructure to Azure, one of the things I really want to put out here is, we are Microsoft is constantly investing money into cybersecurity and into the protections we have. We're governed by well over 90 kind of global compliance and audit requirements. We have thousands of global cybersecurity experts all across the globe handling this stuff.
And so speaking of all those global customers, many, we've heard you've been working with FSI customers on this. Without mentioning names, can you talk about an example of a global fintech that recently deployed this? And also, we'd love to, have you talk about consistent experiences. So let's start with the example of the global tech.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this company, again, they're based here in Texas, but they do have a global reach. They essentially kind of design applications and APIs for mortgage generation, I should say, I'm sorry. And so which means that they essentially kind of host these applications in their own data centers and even in Azure. And they serve this out to customers around the world, so that their customers can go ahead and access these applications to help in mortgage generation and management. So they have a few very strict requirements when it comes to getting access to their applications and their hosted content. First and foremost is protection of that data, and the access is critical. They have users from around the world, and we kind of talked about potentially, from a contractor kind of standpoint, they have a number of kind of offshore developers, for example, who are coming in, connecting to the hosting environment and doing development. Now these are essentially kind of contractors that may come in for a week and then get rolled over to another project. Another contractor comes in, so they have no way of predicting the devices and the state and health of those devices. So, but what they
speaking of the contractors, sorry to keep interrupting. I mean, this is a great conversation. Many organizations have on-prem applications alongside cloud SaaS applications, and there's a need to strike the balance, right, and have the flexibility for the end user experience, like those contractors in those examples. Consistent experiences come in via browser as well. Another example is customers using cloud-based services like Teams and accessing data that reside on premise. So David, can you share your screen and show us how this works in action? Maybe a typical scenario we hear: you're working from home, you need to access the secure info. Show us what that experience looks like, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I can certainly do that. So the great thing about WVD is, yes, there are traditional kind of applications for it, but if I'm coming in from, again, my in-laws' desktop, is I can just access this from a browser. So all I need to do is log in. The great thing, we've got a nice short link, so I don't have to type the whole thing in. It'll take me to, and it may require me to log in because my session's been idle. So as I come in, and I'll be able to, again, go back to conditional access, right? Just a bunch of yes or no questions. Here's my first yes or no question. Do I know my password? I do. You'll see here, okay, I'm coming in from an unknown device. I need to go through a second factor authentication. I'll just click that here on my phone. Smile at my camera so that it recognizes my Face ID, and I should be good to go. And this will just take me in, and I'll be able to see all of the kind of the remote resources that I have access to. And so I can just come in and see my desktop here. I can just click on this. It'll say, hey, do I want to be able to utilize my clipboard or not? I'm being very generous there. I can choose to lock that down so I can't copy and paste data in between. And
this is really powerful, David, right? You think about just being able to go to a URL and log in, authenticate, do the zero trust, and then now you're getting the whole basically desktop experience all inside of a browser. A lot of our financial services customers had physical desktops in their offices. You basically take that desktop experience and now enabled it in a browser and just rapidly enabled them to kind of be able to work really anywhere on any device. One of the things that we've heard from customers that's kind of special about Azure is the concept of multi-session. Could you also talk a little bit and show us why this is a compelling capability?
Yeah, so traditionally, if I wanted to kind of I wanted to give a user kind of a true rich kind of Windows-based desktop is I'm kind of stuck to doing this on a one-to-one basis, because Windows, I can have multiple users, but I can't necessarily have them connect concurrently. If I want to have multiple users connect concurrently, I have to go with a server operating system and enable kind of session hosting on top of that. With Windows 10 multi-session I'm getting a true Windows 10 environment or true Windows 10 operating system where I'm able to have multiple users connecting concurrently. So I'm getting all the power of Windows 10 with the kind of all the economies of scale you get with running these solutions in the cloud to ensure that I'm getting more for my money. So I'm investing less and getting more. What that means is, again, typical to traditional remote desktop solutions is I can have a pool or a cluster of hosts, and I have one here. Let me just make this a touch bigger. So I have a pool of hosts here. You'll see I've got, I believe, 2 hosts, and I've been very generous with how many sessions I can have. So that means is now within my 2 hosts I'm able to look to see, okay, well, who have I got connected? So I can come into my group and check out my users. I have 4 users, as you see here. Right now I have 3 connected, and I've got these 3 users up and running now. I had a feeling when I kind of thought about, we show this today, that the user I logged in as would get added onto a second host. So in the essence of full transparency, I've already I have the other sessions available. So let me just grab these real quick. There is Alex and there is Adele. I have them all running, also here running on Teams. It looks like Adele has made a coffee run. So let me
I think one of the great things you're showing here is that multi-user. I know, once in a while when I do demos, I have to, shift browser windows, but being able to do multi-user all on the same desktop and getting, a lot achieved without having to spawn numerous sessions as well is a huge value. So thank you for sharing that. That was super insightful. And showing us the value of Windows Virtual Desktop. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Shiva. So Shiva, you've been known to architect and coach many customers and navigate towards their goals. Speaking of coaching and goals, I hear you have some pretty cool plans starting tomorrow.
Yes, Edwin. So tomorrow we are starting the AOSO soccer here. I coach 2 teams, the U9 and U11. So I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. It's great to be out there with boys.
Oh, fantastic. Just like with Carla, I'm going to ask you for advice because I definitely need to get out and start running again. So anyway, can you give us a quick rundown of what risk modeling is and why do insurance providers need to do risk modeling?
Yeah, sure, Edwin. So the insurance providers, we all buy insurance. You have auto insurance, home insurance. Some buy life insurance, accidental insurance. So there's a plethora of actually insurance products out there that people buy. Also, if you're also trading, there's insurance for that. So the way they actually do the pricing of those is they take the past data, the past history of the data, depending on your geography, depending on the age group that you're in, and then they actually try to predict the future. There is no way of knowing, when something might occur. They can only do predictions that they do with the data they have. So I actually put a picture here, which actually shows, it's a simple model, a risk model, where they're actually taking in a few inputs. There's actually a age in the middle. There's an age group here. There's a salary group. There's a different class, and then they're trying to pick the best model that predicts the future. So that's how they do. the risk modeling is it's a fundamental to the insurance business.
So Shiva, why is this a focus? And also, why is it a pain point for many of our insurance providers, but then even some of our other customers that are working with these large data sets and need to be able to kind of harness this kind of risk modeling for other applications?
It's a good question, Johansson. The reason is it's a pain point is there is a lot of amount of data. So they have been record keeping for several decades now. So there is a huge amount of data, from a each region perspective. But when you actually when you actually expand that to the whole region, whole state, the whole US, or maybe to the world, they have a number of data points that they have to add. So, and as we know, the models get better with more and more data, so they can make better predictions. So you have an advantage as being insurance carrier if you can harness the data. The more data that you use, it can be more accurate decisions and it can be a better data-driven decisions.
No, I think being able to analyze that quickly can help customers, solve even more issues and get to their goals. So I love explanations through visualizations. Can you possibly open up a whiteboard and talk about an example of one of these challenges and how we're helping address it?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Can you see my screen, my whiteboard?
Sure can.
Okay, so I'm going to give an example of how insurance pricing would work for a home insurance, specifically those are actually out in on the coastal area. So let's say you're actually in Florida here somewhere on the coast. I have a nice house there. Most of the high risk for this would be not through the land, but through the hurricanes that you actually get. So the insurance carriers want to know what is the likelihood that a given property would fall in the hurricane track, or whether there's a storm surge, in the neighborhood in the zip code. So they actually want to consider, the most of the stuff that they actually are seeing. So the way they actually do is they would actually want to use the National Weather Service NOAA. Which is actually part of NWS, the National Weather Service. That's the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. So they actually has been record keeping about all the hurricanes that's been happening in the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, for the last several decades, going back to I think 40s or 50s. So there's a huge amount of data. I think they have over 10,000. There's over 10,000 or so the hurricanes they actually have it, more than that. So as the hurricanes moves through the land, on the ocean to the land, they actually, for each day, every second, or I don't know what's the resolution, but they are, they're counting, they're actually picking up your longitude, latitude, your pressure, your temperature, your dew point, your whatnot. So they're actually getting all the physics, everything that's happening with that. So they actually want to use that information to predict the future, the insurance carrier. So what's the likelihood that something would be in the path that they are insuring. So NOAA actually has been all the data, it's been public, that's been they're gathering. They also had built a model in the 80s, something in the Fortran. So this is a model they have been using always to predict what's the hurricane season going to be. So this is something most of the insurance, if not all, insurance carriers actually use to actually price the properties that they are interested in. Traditionally they actually do this modeling is they actually take a huge server, they actually run this program on that machine with all the data they actually are getting from the NOAA. The problem here is the models run long. It's not uncommon if the model runs for weeks in insurance industry. To make it faster, they add more capacity, they add more CPU, but pretty soon that will be expensive here. So they actually have always a bargaining, whether they want to add more capacity and run more faster, or maybe use more data. So they're always in that zone. And most of the carriers, they are not being able to use it. At least the one I've been working with, they actually have been using maybe 1/10 of the data. So they have been running pretty much, people run low resolution models to actually get data faster within a reasonable financial limit. So the way we can do in Azure is we actually have data storage technologies. That's actually data lake Gen 2, and then we have the compute technologies that can actually scale based on your need. So if you want to run, a low resolution model or something quick and dirty, you can run in a few machines, but you can also scale up to thousands of machines. There's no limit for that, and you can actually run on a very large scale model, which is a very high resolution with all the data that you have for these several decades. But these can run, so pretty much the logic here is you're going from a sequential run to a parallel run. So you pretty much get the time. So which is actually the essential here, because you don't want to call like an insurance carrier and say, here the answer in a month, right? And the same thing goes with the underwriting. If they want to make some changes, tweak them, tweak the model and run again, wait for 3 more months, 3 more weeks again. So with this one, customers will be able to run faster when they can bring down the runtime from the weeks back down to hours. I can show the real quick on how the architecture would look like.
I think Shiva, the example you gave is probably very valuable for people to understand kind of the large amounts of data, the ability to then take data that's not just data that the customer has or the client data. It's about taking data from maybe even third-party systems, public sources, being able to merge that data. It could be geo-based data, and then being able to run these kind of complex models to then really be able to get and harness kind of the risk that's out there and be able to calculate that and show that at a pretty rapid pace. I mean, one of the things that you didn't really touch on, but the time it takes customers to do this today, right? This is an effort that we know takes days, maybe weeks, maybe to run these kind of complex models. How quickly can customers kind of optimize with this type of model and the ability to kind of leverage Azure to be able to then scale up those resources on demand and as needed?
Yeah, that's a very good important point, Johnson, because most of these models are legacy models that have been developed like decades ago, and they have not been touched. So they're very well written models, but you don't need to in this case, in this example, you do not need to change the model. We actually wrapped up with a Python libraries because Fortran we didn't want to touch. It's been well written. It's very well valued. It's been used many years. So we wrapped up that to scale into Azure. So we're getting most out of it. We're getting more value out of it by wrapping with Python libraries around that. So that was one value. The second is, with accurate predictions, it's not just the customers that are getting the benefit. It's the company who is doing the pricing. But it also helps the insurance companies to keep keep accurate records in the accounting. So when they do the financial statements in a balance sheets, they need to put the loss reserves for that. So this actually gives them a better picture of how many reserves they have to hold, and whatnot. So there's a lot of multiple benefits with this. So talk
about the architecture. What does it take to do this? And then we'd also love for you to kind of also show us what this actually looked like. Maybe jump into a quick demo here as well.
Yeah, sure, Johnson. So it depends on how they actually architect how their Azure is laid out. This will actually might have little changes here, but in a simple architecture, they actually have a machine here that they actually run the model on as a jump host. So in a jump host, they'll actually run the model here. They would actually store all the data in Azure files and Azure Blob storage. It can be Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Depending on what the security is, how they intend to use the data they actually hosting, they can pick a different options for the data. But the core of the processing happens in the Azure Batch. This is where the model is broken down into individual tasks, individual jobs. And each other job gets into each machine. You can actually have an option here to have few other tasks go onto each machine, depending on whether you take a small machine or you can take a large machine. Then you actually run those through completion via using our Azure Batch Scheduler. And that's all. It's all taken out. The implementation is taken out from the user because it's all PaaS. So Microsoft manages the entire internal details for you. You can actually expose this entirely in a virtual network. So this would be entirely accessible only to your organization or your users. Even the Azure files, the data that you're pulling in, we can pull through a private link. So that will be going on through a private endpoint, service endpoints here. So like you get the security that you need. B, the runtime goes from the weeks to few hours. With the large amount of data, you're talking about tens of gig, hundreds of gigabytes of data with billions of data points. So it is a big value proposition here. I'll quickly switch to my screen here to run a model here.
Yeah, we'd love to kind of take a quick 1 to 2 minute look here on kind of what's possible from this experience.
Yeah, so I actually pulled on a Python model here. So this actually it is. So I have the Python model. I have the configuration where I actually have stored all the data. What's my input data, where I should be running the job, and my Azure subscription details and so whatnot. Now I have 3 input data sets that I'm feeding in. This could be same as 3 input data sets from the 3 different hurricane data I'm feeding in. So when I actually submit this into Azure, so it's actually now creating a pool. It creates a pool of machines. You can see it's now starting to prepare my pool of machines. It's adding the tasks, individual tasks to those machines. It's now actually picking up, it's actually priming those virtual machines right now. That's the only one that just takes a little bit of time, but once they are primed up, then it actually submits a job. It's actually pulling down some dependent packages as well, because this Python job needs some packages.
That's great. That's great, Shiva. I think the ability just showing here to be able to jump in and leverage that data and jump into that jump host and then start to scale up, right? So now the machines are kind of loading up and scaling. And then roughly how long does this job typically take?
This in a sequential model probably would take. This is a simple job. This takes maybe 45 minutes or so. But if I have 10 machines, it can bring down to 4 minutes. So wow. You go from 45 minutes to like 4 minutes now, and because you have the scale that you can actually go to in Azure. If I actually put more data sets, it could be a 12-hour job and bring down to a few hours. So now the machines are priming up. You can see the color coding here that it's creating when the job gets to when the jobs gets to here, the color would change. So the color changes and the jobs are dispatching. Then it will take a few minutes here to actually, for the jobs to finish. But these are all pass surveys, so you don't even need to manage anything on the machines. They'll be brought up, brought down, entirely end-to-end managed for you. You just have to know what's your model, what's your data, and the rest is taken care for you.
Yeah, no, I think this is really powerful to be able to kind of see these kind of capabilities here. We'd love to kind of talk about what's next and how customers can actually take advantage of these capabilities as well. And so we've got a couple call to actions, right? I think this is a great conversation. We'd love for you to engage your account teams to learn exactly how you could do this for any number of scenarios. We talked about insurance, but there's more than insurance. This can be applied to banking and capital markets organizations as well. We'd love to hear your feedback as well. That's the feedback form is there for you to be able to engage and talk to us as well and be able to get connected. And then last but not least, we can schedule an envisioning session. This, Shiva kind of did a whiteboard and talked about what was possible in that insurance scenario. And I'm sure our viewers are actually thinking about their own scenarios for their own lines of business. And we'd love to kind of envision with you and think about what's possible here. So as we think about jumping into our Q&A, we talked about a variety of different topics that we've learned here over the last 6 months. Our CSAs have been working side by side with financial services organizations to help accelerate their journey to zero trust, minimizing any disruptions to user experience, providing quick time to value, and solutions through things like Windows Virtual Desktop. We also showed how Azure Batch, Azure Files, and Data Lake Gen 2, traditionally painful and slow analysis of big data like risk modeling, can be dramatically improved. You talked about 45 minutes to 4 minutes. That's an example of that turnaround time from a few weeks to a few hours. It's really just super exciting.
Yeah, definitely, Johansson. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for Q&A. If we could go to the next slide. But for those audience members, please submit your questions via YouTube or comments via the FSI Fridays feedback link. Again, thanks for attending today's session via YouTube or watching live. If you haven't already, please register for the FSI notification. It's invites by going to aka.ms/FSI Fridays. We have our YouTube channel, aka ms/FSI Fridays recap to watch previous sessions, and don't forget to subscribe. And Johansson, we have one more session in August lined up and a preview of what's to come in September. What's next?
Yeah, so definitely we've got a variety of good sessions that are coming up here in the month of, one more for August. That's the journey to responsible AI, driving trust through building ethical and transparent AI. We're also excited to announce our FSA Friday security-focused September. Starting on the 11th, we'll be talking about security management across hybrid workloads in the cloud. We'll talk about how you can modernize the SOC on the 28th. And then on the 25th, we'll talk about cloud-based device management with MMD. You won't want to miss it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on FSI Fridays.
Thanks, everyone.